Marjorie, you're making it very hard to be your friend. I'm gonna come back some other time.
Oh, just go ahead, desert me, just like everybody else.
All one piece or chopped up?
One piece.
Frozen like a popsicle.
Well, that's a clip from the dark comedy aptly titled Bernie. Jack Black is playing a man called Bernie Tiede, a notorious convicted killer. In the 1990s, Bernie was convicted of murdering an elderly woman, Marjorie, who saw in that clip, worth millions, and hiding her body in a freezer for months. Her freezer in her garage. The crime rocked a small Texas town and inspired a Hollywood film. Bernie was sentenced to prison, but in a surprising turn just yesterday, a judge agreed to reduce his life sentence because of evidence Bernie was sexually abused as a child, evidence that never came up during his trial. So now he's free, more or less. Joining us on this, John Manuelian and Ashley Merchant, both criminal defense attorneys. Nice to have you both. It's an incredible case. I mean, when you really get into it, they were friends, Ashley. He basically lived with Marjorie. They traveled the world together. Apparently, she gave him around $3 million. They got into some sort of a fight. He shot her 4 times and put her in the freezer. And now the judge says, well, because he was sexually abused and that never came up during the trial, that's important evidence that would have changed the sentence. What do you think about that?
I think that is important evidence. I think that's some of the most important evidence that they could have in a case like this. And it could have definitely changed the outcome. It could have, one, changed the sentence that he received, could have mitigated the life sentence that he received, but it also could have changed the outcome of the actual trial. If there was some evidence, as we've heard, that he possibly disassociated with himself and with his own reality at the time of this crime, he could have potentially been found not guilty by reason of insanity. And so I'm sure the DA and the judge took all that in consideration when deciding to undo his sentence and release him on bond.
Well, John, the reason why this came up is that someone saw that Bernie Tiede had a small collection of self-help books for victims of sexual abuse. And a counselor, upon pushing him on it, then he reveals that between the ages of 12 and 18, he was sexually abused. That's all we know from the reports. Does there have to be evidence of that? Are they just taking his words on it? And the reason why I ask is because part of his character, not only in the movie but in real life, is portraying himself really as a master manipulator.
Well, when you think about it, Jenna, the only evidence that there would be on something like this from years ago, if there's no police report and there's no arrest, is his memory. And that would be determinative of the psychiatrist. He is trained. Psychiatrists are trained to identify people that are manipulating, that are lying, that are embellishing. And they decipher that through different types of reports and testing, psychological testing that they do, along with the therapy and the information that they get. So it's very possible that he's lying, but again, that's for psychiatrists to determine. And I believe that the courts are giving him the shot to do it because that wasn't explored in the first case.
You're both excellent criminal defense attorneys because that's what Bernie has, right, as well, right? The defense attorneys that are defending him. I'm sure some of our viewers are thinking, though, Ashley, there's many that have gone through traumatic events in their childhood that don't turn out to be murderers, and certainly don't turn out to murder someone and then hide the body for 9 months. Right. So. Right. How is it so quickly that he only has served, I mean, about 10, 15 years in prison of a life sentence, and now the judge just releases him?
Right, Jenna. I was a little bit surprised by that because, quite frankly, the majority of my clients in my practice have suffered some type of abuse, whether it be mental, emotional, physical, sexual. So I think that the abuse in this case would need to have been demonstrated to be great. It would need to be something that really churns your stomach and really makes you have sympathy for him, because you've got to think about the victims of the crime. This lady was murdered. Her body was placed in a freezer. So they didn't have answers for so long, and this man could have given them those answers. So they must have gone through a great deal of pain, and for them to now say, oh, boom, he's going to be released when we thought he should have been serving this life sentence, has to be extremely traumatic for them.
And again, we don't know the details. John, the granddaughter of Marjorie, described her as a sweet little old woman and said she doesn't really understand this because obviously Bernie could have left the relationship and not killed her grandmother. It's an interesting twist to an already interesting story. Bernie has been released to live with the director of the movie that was created on his life, and he's going to be living in the director's garage apartment. That's part of his terms of release. So one wonders, John, how the movie figured into all of this.
Well, there's obviously a believer in Bernie, and the believer is the director of the film. And the director of the film is willing to give Bernie a chance to live in his place. Obviously, he's not concerned that Bernie's going to hurt him. In fact, I believe the director said he's a nice guy, that this crime was an aberration of his character, and he genuinely believes in him. And going back to why he was released, it's possible that if the sentencing information, this mitigation information, is produced now at a new hearing, it's possible that he may be released pursuant to the time he has served anyway, according to the state's calculation of their credits for people that are serving time in custody.
It's interesting. So he might have been able to get out a little bit early regardless, you're saying, John, of some of this. It raises the question whether or not the movie and the sympathetic portrayal, because that was part of the movie, you sort of like this guy, even though he was a murderer. And it was a strange thing to watch, but it was an interesting movie. And I'm sure some of our viewers have some thoughts on that as well. John, Ashley, great to have you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.